The auctioneer's hammer struck like thunder, each blow echoing through what had once been Victoria Ashwood's sanctuary. They pointed at her grandmother's china cabinet, her late husband's leather-bound books, the oak dining table where she and Edmund had shared countless meals. Everything that had made their house a home now bore white tags with numbers, like gravestones marking the death of a life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sold to bidder number 47, the auctioneer's voice boomed, and another piece of Victoria's heart crumbled as strangers carried away the mahogany dresser Edmund had carved during their first winter together. Victoria pressed her fingertips against the cool window glass, watching through the sheer curtains as they loaded her piano onto a wagon. Edmund had bought it for her 23rd birthday, back when their ranch thrived, and the future stretched before them like endless Montana sky. Now, it disappeared down the dusty road, another casualty of the debts that had consumed everything she held dear. The morning had arrived crisp and unforgiving, painted in shades of grey that matched the hollow feeling in Victoria's chest. She stood by the window of what had been their bedroom, though she supposed it no longer belonged to them now. The room felt different already, stripped of personal belongings, echoing with the footsteps of strangers who wandered through, appraising their former life with calculating eyes. A sharp rap on the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah Montgomery, her closest friend and neighbor, entered without waiting for permission, her round face flushed with indignation and her blue eyes blazing with fury. "Those vultures," Sarah hissed, clutching a basket of bread against her chest. "Look at them out there, picking over your possessions like carrion birds." Victoria managed a weak smile. At least Sarah understood. Most of Edmund's family had turned their backs the moment the will was read, expressing disappointment at the lack of inheritance while conveniently forgetting how Edmund had loaned money to half of them over the years. "They have every right," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bank owns it all now." "The bank might own the property, but this vulgar display—" Sarah shook her head violently. "Edmund would turn in his grave if he knew how they're treating you." Victoria closed her eyes. Edmund had been dead for 3 months now, taken by a fever that arrived with the spring rains and refused to leave until it claimed his life. She had held his hand as he passed, promising him that she would find a way to keep the ranch running. She had failed. Without his knowledge of cattle breeding and his connections with the buyers in Chicago, the debts had piled up faster than snow in a blizzard. "I should go check on the kitchen," Victoria said, though they both knew everything valuable had already been tagged for sale. Sarah caught her arm gently. "You don't have to pretend with me. I've known you since we were children playing in the church garden. Your heart is breaking, and that's nothing to be ashamed of." Victoria nodded, unable to trust her voice. She had grown up in this valley, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a shopkeeper. When she married Edmund Ashwood 7 years ago, she had become part of something bigger, a legacy that stretched back 3 generations. The Ashwood Ranch had been the heart of the community, employing dozens of men, providing beef to the railroad. Towns, hosting harvest festivals that brought families from miles around. Now it was all gone. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window they could see a dust cloud approaching along the main road. As it grew closer, Victoria could make out a group of riders, perhaps 6 or 7, moving at a leisurely pace despite the chaos of the auction. "Who could that be?" Sarah whispered. Victoria strained her eyes against the morning glare. The lead rider sat tall in his saddle, wearing a black coat that seemed too formal for the dusty road. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about his posture, something that made the other riders seem diminished in comparison. "I don't recognize them," Victoria said, though something about the lead rider stirred a memory she couldn't quite place. The group slowed as they approached the ranch entrance, where the auctioneer had erected signs advertising the sale. Victoria watched as the man in black dismounted, his movements fluid and purposeful. He stood for a moment, surveying the scene, with what appeared to be intense concentration before remounting and leading his men toward the house. "Maybe they're here to bid," Sarah suggested, though her tone suggested she didn't quite believe it. Victoria felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. More strangers to witness her humiliation, more eyes to judge how far the Ashwood name had fallen. She smoothed her black morning dress and checked her reflection in the mirror by the door. Her auburn hair, which Edmund had always said reminded him of autumn leaves, was pulled back severely. Her green eyes, once bright with laughter, now held shadows that makeup couldn't hide. The sound of boots on the front steps made them both freeze. The knock that followed was firm, authoritative, not the tentative rap of someone unsure of their welcome. "Mrs. Ashwood." The voice that called through the door was deep, cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I'd like a word with you, if you please." Victoria and Sarah exchanged glances. The auctioneer had strict rules about private interactions during the sale, but something in the man's tone suggested he wasn't someone who concerned himself with other people's rules. "Just a moment," Victoria called back, her voice steadier. Then she felt. She opened the door to find herself looking up at one of the most striking men she had ever seen. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his black coat impressively. His hair was dark with touches of silver at the temples, and his face was marked by sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and intelligent, with a penetrating quality that made her feel as though he could see straight through her carefully maintained composure. "Ma'am." He removed his hat, revealing more of that silver-touched dark hair. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I was hoping we might speak privately about your current situation." Victoria's mouth went dry. Marcus Thorne. She knew that name, whispered in saloons and spoken in hushed tones around kitchen tables throughout the territory. They called him the Demon of Devil's Canyon, a man who had carved out an empire in the Badlands where other men feared to tread. Stories said he had arrived in Montana 15 years ago with nothing but a fast gun and a cold heart, and had proceeded to build the largest and most feared ranch operation west of the Mississippi. Some said he was a rustler who had simply gotten too big to prosecute. Others claimed he had made dark deals with the railroad companies, trading information for land grants. A few whispered that he wasn't quite human, that he had sold his soul for the power to bend others to his will. What everyone agreed on was that Marcus Thorne took what he wanted, and what he wanted usually ended up being everything. "Mr. Thorne," Victoria managed, proud that her voice didn't shake, "I'm not sure what you might want to discuss with me." "May I come in?" he asked, though the way he said it suggested he would be coming in regardless of her answer. Victoria stepped aside, acutely aware of Sarah's sharp intake of breath behind her. Thorne entered with his hat in hand, his eyes taking in every detail of the stripped-down interior with the thoroughness of a man accustomed to evaluating assets. "I'll leave you two to talk," Sarah said quickly, clearly intimidated by Thorne's presence. She squeezed Victoria's hand briefly and disappeared toward the kitchen, though Victoria suspected she would be listening from the hallway. "This is a difficult day for you," Thorne said, his voice carrying what might have been sympathy. He made no move to sit down, instead standing beside the stone fireplace where Edmund's rifle had hung until that morning. "Yes," Victoria agreed. Simply, there seemed little point in pretending otherwise. "I knew your husband." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You knew Edmund?" "We had business dealings. He was an honorable man, even when honor proved costly." Victoria's mind raced. Edmund had never mentioned knowing Marcus Thorne, but then Edmund had been protective of her, careful not to burden her with the darker aspects of running a ranch business. "What kind of business dealings?" she asked. Thorne moved to the window, looking out at the auction proceedings. "Your husband helped me when others would not, when I was still establishing my ranch, when the other cattlemen in the valley would rather see me fail than prosper." Victoria tried to process this information. Edmund had always been generous, sometimes to a fault, but she couldn't imagine him allying himself with someone like Marcus Thorne. "He never mentioned you," she said carefully. "He was wise not to. Association with me has consequences, as you might imagine." Thorne turned back to her, those storm-gray eyes fixed on her face. "But honor demands that debts be repaid." "I don't understand." "Your husband saved my life once. He didn't have to, and it cost him political capital in the Cattlemen's Association. But he did it anyway." Victoria shook her head. "Edmund never told me about any of this. It was 5 years ago. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I was trailing cattle through this valley when a storm hit. Flash flood caught us in the narrow canyon just north of here. I was pinned under my horse for hours before Edmund found me. He could have left me there. It would have solved a problem for a lot of people in this territory. Instead, he pulled me free and brought me to his own doctor." The story rang true to Victoria. Edmund would have helped anyone in such circumstances, regardless of their reputation. "I offered to pay him then," Thorne continued. "He refused any compensation, said one day I might have the chance to return the favor." Victoria felt tears threatening. "That sounds like something he would say." "Indeed, which brings me to why I'm here today." Before Victoria could respond, the auctioneer's voice boomed from outside. "Next lot, the Ashwood family Bible, starting bid $5. Victoria flinched. That Bible had belonged to Edmund's grandmother, brought west in a covered wagon more than 60 years ago. Thorne's expression darkened. "This display is unseemly. The bank," Victoria began. "The bank is owed money, not dignity." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the leather of his coat and a hint of something like pine and smoke. "I propose to buy your debt from them." Victoria stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Buy my debt?" "The full amount. Everything you owe, transferred to me." "But why would you?" "I told you. I owe your husband a debt." Victoria's mind struggled to process what he was suggesting. Even if such a thing were possible, the bank would never agree to such an arrangement. Thorne smiled for the first time since entering the house, and the expression transformed his face completely. It wasn't a warm smile. There was too much predator in it for warmth, but it held genuine amusement. "Mrs. Ashwood, you underestimate my influence with financial institutions. I have already spoken with the bank president. He is quite amenable to the arrangement." Victoria sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "You've already—" "The paperwork was completed this morning. The auction ends in 1 hour, at which point it becomes void, and these people will be required to leave your property." Victoria stared at him, unable to speak. Around them, she could hear the continuing sounds of the auction, the auctioneers' rhythmic chant, the murmur of bidders, but it felt like a distant dream, disconnected from the overwhelming reality of what Thorne was telling her. "There must be conditions," she said finally. "No one does something like this without expecting something in return. Perceptive, yes, there are terms." Victoria waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You will work for me. The ranch will remain in your name, but its operation will be integrated with mine. You will report to my foreman, follow my methods, sell to my buyers." It was better than losing everything. Victoria knew that. But the thought of being beholden to Marcus Thorne, of having her family's land become part of his vast empire, made her stomach turn. "And if I refuse?" Thorne shrugged elegantly. The auction continues. You lose everything as planned. Through the window, Victoria could see the auctioneer gesturing wildly, describing the qualities of her mother's quilts. The same quilts that had covered her as a child, that had warmed her and Edmund during their first winter together. How long? She asked quietly. How long what? How long would this arrangement last? Something flickered in Thorne's eyes. That depends largely on you, Mrs. Ashwood. Debts can be repaid in many ways. There was something in his tone that made her look at him more carefully. He was still standing by the fireplace, but his posture had changed subtly. There was less formal distance in it now, something more personal. You said yourself that honor demands debts be repaid, Victoria said slowly. Your debt to Edmund. Yes, and now you have incurred a debt to me. The implication hung between them like smoke from an untended fire. Victoria thought of Edmund, of the promises she had made at his deathbed, of the legacy she had failed to preserve. Then she thought of the alternative, of leaving this place with nothing but the clothes on her back and nowhere to go. I accept your terms, she said before she could lose her nerve. Thorne nodded, as though he had expected no other answer. He reached into his coat and produced a leather document case, withdrawing several folded papers. These will need your signature, he said, setting them on the small table beside her chair. The bank transfers, the employment contract, and the management agreement. Victoria stared at the papers without picking them up. You were very confident I would accept. Desperation has a predictable quality, he said, not unkindly. And you are, as I said, an honorable woman, like your husband. She looked up at him sharply. There was something in the way he said those words that made her think he meant more than he was saying. But his expression had returned to that carefully, neutral mask he wore. The sound of boots on the porch interrupted them. A moment later, the front door opened without ceremony, and Sarah burst in. Victoria, they're selling the horses. They've got midnight in a rope and... She stopped short when she saw Thorne, her face paling. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. It's all right, Sarah, Victoria said, reaching for the papers. Mr. Thorne was just leaving. She signed each document without reading it thoroughly. A foolish decision she would have lectured Edmund about under other circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances, and normal wisdom seemed insufficient for the situation she found herself in. Thorne gathered the papers with practiced efficiency. I will send men to halt the auction immediately. The items already sold will be returned or replaced. Replaced? Victoria asked. My dear Mrs. Ashwood, you seem to forget that you are now affiliated with an enterprise of considerable means. Your grandmother's china can be retrieved from wherever it has gone. If it cannot, I will have matching pieces commissioned. Victoria felt a strange, dizzy sensation, as though the world had tilted slightly off its axis. This morning, she had awakened expecting to watch her life's possessions scattered to the winds. Now she was being told they could be returned, that her home could be restored. I don't understand any of this, she admitted. Thorne moved toward the door, then paused. Understanding will come with time. For now, it is enough that you are safe. Safe. The word echoed strangely in Victoria's mind. Was she safe now? Or had she simply traded one form of danger for another? Mr. Thorne, she called as he reached for the door handle. Why did my husband really help you? The truth this time. He turned back to her, and for a moment the mask slipped. She saw something raw and vulnerable in his eyes, something that spoke of old wounds and carefully guarded secrets. Because, he said quietly, your husband recognized something in me that others were determined not to see, the possibility of redemption. With that, he was gone, leaving Victoria and Sarah staring at each other in stunned silence. Outside, they could hear raised voices, the auctioneer protesting, the sounds of confusion and argument. Through the window, Victoria watched as several of Thorne's men approached the auctioneer's podium. The argument was brief. Whatever documents they presented seemed to settle the matter quickly. "Victoria," Sarah said slowly, sinking into a chair, "what has just happened here?" Victoria shook her head, still trying to process it all. "I think," she said carefully, "my life has just taken a turn I never could have imagined. Marcus Thorne." Sarah spoke the name like a curse. "Victoria, do you know what people say about him?" "I've heard the stories. They say he's killed men for less than looking at him wrong. They say he has judges and politicians in his pocket, that he can destroy a man's life with a word." Victoria watched as Thorne mounted his horse outside. Even from a distance, there was something compelling about him, something that drew the eye and held it. "They also say," she said thoughtfully, "that he always keeps his word, that once he gives his guarantee, it's as good as gold." "That's what worries me," Sarah muttered. As if sensing their scrutiny, Thorne turned in his saddle to look back at the house. Even across the distance, Victoria felt the impact of his gaze. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been polite, or might have been something else entirely, then spurred his horse toward the main road. Victoria remained by the window long after the dust cloud of his departure had settled. Around the ranch, the auctioneer's men were packing up their stands, loading the already sold items back onto wagons. People were leaving, some looking confused, others angry at being cheated out of what they'd considered easy pickings. "I should go tell my husband what's happened," Sarah said, gathering her skirts. "He won't believe it." Victoria nodded absently. She was thinking about the paper she had signed, about the terms she had agreed to without fully understanding. Most of all, she was thinking about the expression in Marcus Thorne's eyes when he had mentioned redemption. After Sarah left, Victoria walked through her house, which remained her house because of a debt of honor between two men. She touched the walls, the door frames, the few pieces of furniture that hadn't been tagged for sale. Everything felt different now, charged with new meaning and new uncertainty. In the kitchen, she found an envelope propped against the sugar bowl. Her name was written across it in bold, angular script that could only be Thorne's. Inside was a single piece of paper with a brief message. "Mrs. Ashwood, my foreman, James Garrett, will call on you tomorrow at 10 o'clock to discuss the integration of operations. I trust this will be convenient. MT." Beneath the message was a note in different handwriting. "Ma'am, Mr. Thorne instructed me to inform you that if you have any concerns about this arrangement, you may reach me at the Cattleman's Bank in Helena. William Hayes, Bank President." Victoria set the letter aside and moved to the window again. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. The auction stands were gone. The wagons disappeared. Her ranch looked almost normal again, though she knew it would never be the same. A movement near the barn caught her eye. One of Edmund's horses, a young mare named Stella, was standing by the fence, still wearing the rope. Hilter they had put on her for the auction. Someone had removed her from the bidding, but left her there, uncertain where she belonged. Victoria stepped outside for the first time since dawn. The air was crisp and clean, carrying scents of sage and distant snow. She walked slowly to the barn, hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. The experience of the morning had left her, feeling raw, exposed, like her skin had been peeled away to reveal tender flesh beneath. Stella nickered softly as Victoria approached. The mare had been Edmund's favorite, a gift for their third wedding anniversary. He had spent hours training her, teaching her to respond to the slightest touch, to anticipate his needs. "I know, girl," Victoria murmured, stroking the mare's neck. "Everything's different now." As she stood there, she heard the sound of horses approaching again. For a moment, her heart raced, thinking Thorne had returned. But these were different. Riders coming from the direction of town. 3 men rode into the yard, their leader a tall, thin man with a carefully waxed mustache. Victoria recognized him immediately. Judge Cornelius Whitfield, one of Edmund's most vocal critics in the Cattlemen's Association. "Mrs. Ashwood," Whitfield called, not bothering to dismount. "I trust you are well?" "Well enough, Judge," Victoria replied carefully. "I hear there has been some irregularity with today's proceedings." Victoria lifted her chin. "I assume you mean the auction has been cancelled." "Quite so. Most irregular. The bank claimed some prior arrangement had superseded their original agreement." "That's correct." Whitfield's moustache twitched. "May I ask the nature of this arrangement?" Victoria considered her words carefully. She had no fondness for Whitfield, who had always treated Edmund with poorly concealed disdain and had made several attempts to purchase Ashwood land at below-market prices. "Someone has chosen to buy the debt," she said simply. "Someone?" Whitfield leaned forward in his saddle. "Someone with considerable resources, I presume." "Yes. And this someone would be Marcus Thorne, I suppose." Victoria met his gaze steadily. "I'm not sure that's any of your concern, Judge." Whitfield's face flushed red. "Young woman, I'll have you know that I am a pillar of this community. What affects the valley affects us all." "Then you'll be pleased to know the Ashwood Ranch will continue operating under Thorne's control." Victoria said nothing. Whitfield straightened in his saddle, his expression hardening. "You have made a grave error, Mrs. Ashwood. Marcus Thorne is not the savior you seem to think. That man has blood on his hands and darkness in his heart. Aligning yourself with him will only bring sorrow." "Thank you for your concern, Judge," Victoria said, her voice cool as winter morning. "But I believe I can manage my own affairs." "Your husband would be ashamed," Whitfield spat. "Edmund was a decent man who worked to build his reputation through honest means. You've tarnished that in a single day by throwing in with the likes of Marcus Thorne." Victoria felt anger flare in her chest, hot and pure. "My husband is dead, Judge Whitfield, and I am alive. I made the choice that allows me to remain so and to keep his legacy alive as well." "Legacy?" Whitfield laughed harshly. "What legacy? You've handed everything Edmund built to the most ruthless man in the territory. There will be nothing left of the Ashwood name within a year." "We shall see," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the fury burning inside her. Whitfield gathered his reins. "Indeed we shall. Good day, Mrs. Ashwood. I fear it may be the last good day you enjoy for some time." He spurred his horse and rode away, his companions following without a word. Victoria watched them go, fighting the trembling in her hands. She had expected judgment from the community. That was inevitable. But the venom in Whitfield's words had surprised her with its intensity. As evening approached, Victoria found herself standing on the front porch, looking out over lands that were still hers, but would now be operated according to Marcus Thorne's methods. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and shadow, beautiful and strange. Sarah returned just as the first stars began to appear, bringing a covered dish and news from town. "Everyone's talking about it," she reported, settling beside Victoria on the porch steps. "Half are saying you've lost your mind. The other half are saying you're the luckiest woman alive. And what do you say?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I say time will tell. But Victoria, you need to be careful. Marcus Thorne isn't just a successful rancher. He's a force of nature, and forces of nature can be just as destructive as they are powerful." Victoria nodded. "I know, but Sarah, what choice did I have?" "None," her friend admitted. "That's what frightens me." They sat in comfortable silence as the darkness deepened around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, the sound lonely and wild. Victoria felt an answering wildness in her own chest, something that had been awakened by the day's events. "He said Edmund saved his life," she said suddenly. "What? Thorn?" "He said Edmund saved his life 5 years ago, during the flood." Sarah's eyes widened. "I remember that flood. Edmund was gone for 3 days, said he was checking the northern herds. He found Thorn trapped under his horse, brought him back to Dr. Morrison." "And you believe him?" Victoria thought about the expression in Thorn's eyes when he had spoken of Edmund, the carefully controlled emotion in his voice. "Yes," she said, "I do." "That doesn't change what he is, Victoria, what people say he's done." "No," Victoria agreed, "it doesn't. But it did change something. It gave her a window into a different side of Marcus Thorn, a side that felt gratitude and honored debts. It wasn't much, but it was more than most people knew about the man they called the Demon of Devil's Canyon. As the night deepened and Sarah returned home, Victoria remained on the porch. She thought about Edmund, about the promises she had made him, about the future that had seemed so impossible just that morning. Now the future was uncertain in a completely different way. She was bound to Marcus Thorn through debt and contract, her life intertwined with his in ways she couldn't yet understand. It should have terrified her. In many ways, it did. But underneath, the fear was something else, something like anticipation. Her life had been saved today, her home preserved, her husband's legacy given a chance to continue. Whatever price she would have to pay for that salvation, she would pay it. Tomorrow, James Garrett would arrive to discuss the integration of operations. Tomorrow, she would begin to learn what it meant to be part of Marcus Thorn's empire. Tonight, she would sit under the stars and remember that she was still here, still fighting, still alive. For now, that was enough. The weeks that followed blurred together like landscapes seen from a speeding train. Victoria learned to wake before dawn, when the Montana sky held nothing but stars and the promise of another demanding day. James Garrett, Thorn's foreman, proved to be a methodical man who spoke in measured sentences and expected immediate compliance with his instructions. Under the new arrangement, everything changed. The cattle were branded with a new mark, combining the Ashwood and Thorn symbols. New fencing appeared across the northern pastures. Men Victoria didn't recognize rode the boundaries of what had been purely Ashwood land. Victoria threw herself into the work with fierce determination. She learned to read the new ledgers, to understand the complex web of contracts that governed cattle sales and territorial agreements. Every day brought fresh evidence of just how vast Thorn's operation truly was, but it was the evenings when he visited that confused her most. Marcus Thorn appeared without warning, usually around sunset, riding alone across the fields that now belonged to both of them. He would dismount at her gate, remove his hat with formal courtesy, and request permission to enter. These visits followed no pattern she could discern. Sometimes days would pass between them, sometimes mere hours. They would sit on her porch or by her fireplace, and he would ask about the ranch's operations, about any difficulties she was encountering, about her thoughts on the changes being implemented. But increasingly, their conversations drifted toward other subjects. Books they had read, opinions on territorial politics, memories of people and places. During one such evening in late October, as the first snow dusted the mountain peaks, Victoria found herself confessing something she had told no one else. "I never truly felt like I belonged here," she said, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "Even when I was married to Edmund, I always felt like I was playing a role. The rancher's wife, the proper lady of the valley." Thorn, sitting across from her with a brandy in hand, tilted his head thoughtfully. "And now?" Victoria considered. "The question. Now I feel like I'm becoming something I never thought I could be, something stronger. The business suits you. he observed. "Garrett says you have a natural head for strategy." "Do I?" She looked at him directly. "And what do you say?" Something shifted in his expression, something that made the air between them feel charged with unspoken possibilities. "I say you are not the woman I expected to find when I came here." "What did you expect?" "A grieving widow, someone to be managed and protected until suitable arrangements could be made." Victoria felt a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep in her chest. "Suitable arrangements? You mean until you could marry me off to someone more convenient?" Thorne's eyes flashed with something like surprise. "You speak candidly. I've learned that life is too short for anything else." They sat in silence for several minutes, the fire crackling between them. Then Thorne set down his glass and reached into his coat. "There is something I need to tell you," he said, withdrawing a folded document. "Something I should have told you from the beginning." Victoria felt her heart begin to race, though she couldn't say why. "Your husband didn't just save my life," Thorne continued slowly. "He saved my soul. And when he did that, he made me promise something." "What kind of promise?" Thorne unfolded the document, and Victoria recognized it immediately as a legal contract. "He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would ensure you were provided for, that you would have a place in the world where you could be more than just someone's widow." Victoria stared at the papers in his hands. "You planned this, all of this, not planned exactly but prepared for." He met her eyes, his expression serious. "Your husband was a remarkable judge of character, Mrs. Ashwood. He knew what I was capable of accomplishing, and he knew what you were capable of becoming." Victoria stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, in earnest, transforming the familiar landscape into something mystical and new. "You never intended this to be temporary," she said, not quite a question. "No. The debt you spoke of, Edmund's kindness to you, it wasn't just about saving your life. No, it was about giving me a reason to save yours." Victoria turned back to him, her mind reeling. "And what am I to you now? An obligation? A promise to a dead man?" Thorne rose as well, moving closer, but stopping just out of reach. "At first, yes, but now—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Now you are something I did not expect to find again in this lifetime, which is hope." The word hung between them like a bridge that neither quite dared to cross. Victoria felt something fundamental shifting inside her, like tectonic plates rearranging the landscape of her heart. "There's more," Thorne said quietly. He held out the document again. "Edmund also insisted that if you chose to, if we were to, that the arrangement would be formalized properly." Victoria took the papers with trembling hands. As she read, her eyes widened. It was a marriage contract already signed by Thorne's hand and witnessed. All that remained was her signature. "He assumed rather a lot," she said, though her voice lacked any real anger. "He was a perceptive man. He saw something in both of us that we couldn't see ourselves." Victoria looked up at Thorne, really looked at him. The harsh lines around his eyes, the careful way he held himself, the vulnerability he was showing her by revealing all of this. "You care for me," she said, surprised by the discovery. "Yes. And you think I care for you. I hope you might learn to." Victoria smiled, feeling something like dawn breaking inside her chest. "I believe, Mr. Thorne, that I already have." She moved to the small writing desk by the window and signed her name beneath his with steady, decisive strokes. When she turned back to him, document in hand, she found him watching her with an expression of such profound relief that it took her breath away. "There will be talk," she said. "Let them talk. Judge Whitfield will be apoplectic. Judge Whitfield can go, hang himself." Victoria laughed, a sound of pure joy that seemed to fill every corner of the room. Thorne stepped forward then, closing the distance between them. His hand cupped her face gently, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I never thought," he said softly, "that I would find anything worth fighting to protect again. And I never thought I would find a reason to build something new from the ashes of the old." When he kissed her, it was with the tenderness of a man who had forgotten that gentleness existed, combined with the passion of someone who had just remembered what it meant to truly want something. Victoria melted into him, into the warmth and strength and surprising softness she found there. When they broke apart, she remained in his arms, marveling at how right it felt. "So, what happens now?" she asked. Thorne smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Now we build an empire worthy of the woman who will share it." The storm outside intensified, but inside the farmhouse, two souls who had lost everything discovered that sometimes, when the world strips you bare, it's preparing you to rebuild, stronger than before. The feared rancher had found his heir, and she had found her future. Together, they would forge something neither could have imagined alone. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the land in pristine white. By morning, everything would look different, transformed into something beautiful and new. And inside the warmth of the farmhouse, two hearts beat in rhythm with the promise of tomorrow. In the end, it wasn't about the land or the cattle or even the debts. It was about recognizing that sometimes salvation comes in the form of someone willing to see past what you've been to what you could become. Marcus Thorne had made good on his promise to a dying man, but in doing so, he had found something infinitely more valuable than honor or obligation. He had found love, and Victoria Ashwood Thorne, standing in the arms of the man the territory, revered and respected in equal measure, knew that she had finally found where she truly belonged, not just in this house or on this land, but with this man who had seen her strength when she couldn't see it herself. The future stretched before them, vast and full of possibilities. There would be challenges, there always were when building something worth having, but they would face them together. The feared rancher and his heir, partners in every sense of the word. As the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, they made plans for spring, for the years to come, for the legacy they would build together. And somewhere in the back of Victoria's mind, she could almost hear Edmund's voice. Warm, with approval and something like satisfaction. He had known. Somehow he had known, and she was grateful. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.